Amina had lived her whole life in a small desert village, where every day felt the same. Yet every day carried its own set of challenges. The sun rose early and harsh, painting the sand in golden colors that sometimes looked beautiful, and sometimes felt like a reminder of how unforgiving life could be. For most people, the desert was a home passed down for generations. But for Amina, the desert was both a home and a struggle. She had learned to survive with strength, patience, and silence. Amina's small house stood at the far edge of the village. It was built from mud and stones, like most homes in the area, but hers seemed quieter and lonelier. She lived with her daughter, Lena, a bright-eyed girl of 7 who brought light into her life. Lena had a cheerful spirit, full of questions, laughter, and curiosity. Sometimes Amina wondered how her daughter managed to stay so happy in a place where life was so hard. Maybe it was just the innocence of childhood, or maybe Lena simply chose to see the good in everything. Life had not been kind to Amina. She had lost people she trusted, people she thought would support her, and people she once called family. They had walked away one by one, leaving her to raise her daughter alone. She had learned early on that compassion from others was rare. People were polite enough, but when it came to real help or real care, she had never received much. Over time, she stopped expecting kindness altogether. Despite that, Amina worked hard every single day. She woke up before sunrise, swept the floors, fetched water, cooked simple meals, and took care of anything that needed attention. Sometimes, she worked in the small village fields, helping neighbors during planting season. Sometimes she repaired her own roof after strong winds damaged it. She earned enough to survive, and sometimes a little more to buy small treats for Lena. Whenever she brought home a piece of sweet dried fruit or a small toy made of clay, Lena's eyes sparkled like stars. The desert, however, was not always peaceful. Every few weeks, the sky changed color. The wind picked up speed, and a sandstorm swept across the land without warning. People in the village were used to such storms, but that didn't make them less dangerous. Strong winds could carry sand like sharp needles, making it hard to breathe or see. Many villagers stayed inside their homes as soon as they sensed the wind shifting, especially parents with young children. Amina was always alert when a storm approached. She knew it could change everything in a moment. Every time she saw the sky darken, her heart tightened with fear, not for herself, but for her daughter. Lena liked exploring the open areas around the village. She loved watching the dunes and searching for small, colorful stones that sometimes glittered in the sunlight. Amina had warned her many times to stay close, especially during the late afternoon when storms could appear suddenly. Lena listened most of the time, but like any child, her curiosity sometimes led her farther than she should go. One particular day, the air felt different from morning. The sky seemed heavier, and the wind carried a warm, dry touch that made Amina uneasy. She kept glancing outside while cooking lunch, feeling a strange nervousness. By noon, she stepped outside and looked at the desert horizon. The sand in the distance shimmered in a way that told her something was coming. Villagers near her house were also watching the horizon with concerned faces. They knew a storm was on its way. Amina quickly called Lena inside. The little girl ran to her with a handful of small shells she had found near the dried riverbed. She was excited to show them, but Amina gently told her they would look at them later. For now, she wanted Lena to stay indoors. Lena nodded, though she looked disappointed. It broke Amina's heart a little. She didn't want to spoil her child's joy. But she knew storms were no small matter. As the afternoon passed, the breeze turned into wind strong enough to rattle doors. People outside hurried to secure animals and belongings. Children were called home. Amina checked the windows and made sure the door was properly latched. She thought about making tea to calm her nerves, but her hands were trembling slightly, and she didn't know why. Something about this storm felt different, heavier, more unpredictable. A sudden sound made her turn around. The back door, which she thought she had closed tightly, swung open with a loud creak. Before she could react, a gust of wind pushed it further, sending dust swirling into the room. Amina rushed to close it, coughing as the sand scratched her throat. It took her a moment to secure it again. When she finally did, she turned back toward the main room, and her heart nearly stopped. Lena was not there. For a second, Amina froze. She blinked, thinking maybe Lena was hiding behind the curtain or under the table, playing one of her small jokes. "Lena?" she called softly. No answer. She tried again, louder this time. Still nothing. Her chest tightened. She hurried outside, scanning the space around her house. The wind had grown stronger, kicking up more sand. She knew Lena wouldn't go far, but even a few steps could become dangerous in weather like this. She looked to the left, toward the open area where Lena sometimes played. Nothing. She looked to the right, toward the village path. Still nothing. Amina stepped farther outside, her voice rising. "Lena! Where are you?" The wind answered her with a deafening howl. At that moment, her fear turned into full panic. She ran toward the dunes, her heart pounding harder with every step. Her mind raced with the worst thoughts. What if the storm hit fully before she found her daughter? What if Lena was scared, alone, or unable to find her way back? The wind was already strong enough to blur her vision. She shielded her face with her scarf and kept calling out, desperate for even the smallest response. But there was only wind. Amina's legs felt weak, but she refused to stop. She knew she had to keep searching. She knew she had to find her daughter before the real storm hit. At that moment, she did not care about the stinging sand, the burning in her eyes, or the dryness in her throat. All she could think about was Lena. All she could feel was fear. And all she could fight for was time. She had survived everything life threw at her. She had endured loneliness, hardship, and pain. But nothing compared to the terror of losing sight of her daughter in a rising storm. The world around her grew louder and darker. The storm was coming fast, and she was alone in the open desert. Searching with trembling hands and a desperate heart, she had no idea that help was already on the way. Someone she had never met before was about to change her life forever. The wind grew sharper with every passing second, as if the desert itself wanted to warn everyone to stay inside. Amina could barely keep her eyes open now. The sand hit her face like tiny grains of fire, but she did not care. She kept shouting Lena's name, even though her voice was already breaking from fear and dryness. Her feet sank slightly into the loose sand with each step, slowing her down. But she pushed forward, as if her whole life depended on it. The village behind her was slowly disappearing under a thin veil of dust. People were rushing into their homes, doors were being closed tightly. Animals were being taken inside shelters. Everyone knew that once the sandstorm reached its full strength, no one should be outside. But Amina stayed out in the open because nothing was more important than finding her child. Her mind was racing in every direction. She tried to imagine where Lena might have gone. Maybe she had followed a butterfly like she sometimes did. Maybe she had gone to the small ridge near the dunes where she liked to collect tiny stones. Or perhaps she had simply stepped outside when the back door opened and wandered a little too far. Amina tried to call out again, but the wind swallowed her voice before it could travel far. Her chest was tight with fear. Every second felt like an hour. Every step felt like a struggle. She wished she had noticed earlier. She wished she had kept Lena closer. She wished the storm would slow down, even a little, just to give her more time. The sky turned darker, shifting from pale gold to a deep, dusty orange. It was a sign that the main force of the storm was almost there. Amina clenched her fists and forced herself to keep moving. Even though the storm was now pushing against her body, she wrapped her scarf tighter around her head and mouth to breathe more easily, but the air still felt thick and dry. She moved toward a small dune, where Lena often sat to watch the sky. But today, the wind had wiped away footprints and marks from the sand. Everything looked the same. The desert was endless and confusing, especially in a rising storm. Amina spun slowly, searching for any shape or shadow that might be her daughter. Suddenly, a gust of wind hit her so hard that she lost her balance. She fell to her knees, her hands sinking into the sand. For a moment, she stayed still. trying to catch her breath. The storm roared like an angry giant. Tears filled her eyes, partly from fear and partly from the stinging sand. She whispered a small prayer under her breath, asking for strength, asking for help, asking for her daughter's safety. Just then, through the thick, rising dust, she heard a faint voice, not Lena's, but a man's. It came from behind her, growing louder as it approached. She turned quickly, wiping her eyes with trembling fingers. A tall figure appeared from the direction of the village. At first, she could not see his face clearly, but she could tell he was moving with purpose, not fear. When he reached her, he paused for a moment before speaking loudly to be heard over the wind. "Are you searching for someone?" he asked, his voice calm despite the storm. Amina nodded rapidly, trying to speak but unable to form clear words at first. She forced herself to breathe and said, "My daughter. She is missing. Lena, she is 7. She was inside, and now she's gone." The man's eyes widened immediately, and he didn't waste even a second. He lifted his scarf to cover more of his face and stepped closer to her. "Which way does she usually go?" he asked quickly. Amina pointed toward the dunes with a shaking hand. "That direction. She likes to collect stones there. I looked, but I can't find her." "The storm." Before she could finish, the man gently held her shoulder. "Go back to safety. I will look for her." Amina shook her head fiercely. "No, I can't leave her. I must find her." The man understood her fear but also knew the storm was getting stronger. He looked at the sky, then back at her. "We will find her, but you must stay close. Don't go too far. If you fall or get lost, we will lose time." His name was Khalid, but Amina didn't know that yet. He had been traveling through the village on his way to another town. When he saw the storm forming, he decided to stay for the night. He had been helping a villager tie down some animals when he heard Amina calling for her daughter. He didn't think twice. He ran toward her voice immediately. Khalid began walking toward the dunes, using his hand to shield his eyes from the sand. His movements were steady, strong, and confident. He seemed used to traveling in difficult places. Amina followed a few steps behind him, nearly stumbling with every gust of wind. Khalid glanced back at her and slowed down just enough so she could keep up. They climbed the first dune, but there was no sign of Lena. The sand was moving too quickly to leave clear footprints. The wind howled around them like a warning. Amina's voice cracked as she called out again. "Lena, can you hear me?" Only the wind answered. Khalid scanned the surroundings carefully. The sandstorm was making it difficult to see more than a few meters ahead. His eyes searched for anything, movement, color, or shape that did not belong to the shifting sand. Suddenly, he raised his hand. "Look there!" he shouted. Amina turned toward where he pointed. At first, she saw nothing. But then her eyes caught a small piece of cloth moving in the wind. It was light pink. Lena's scarf. Her heart leaped. "That's hers!" she cried. Khalid rushed forward, leaning against the wind. The scarf was trapped under a small rock. He picked it up and showed it to Amina. She held it tightly, feeling both hope and fear rising inside her. If the scarf was here, then Lena must be somewhere close. Before they could call out again, the wind rose sharply, sending a wave of sand across the dune. Amina coughed and covered her face. Khalid grabbed her arm to steady her. "The storm is almost at full strength," he said, raising his voice. "We must find her soon." Amina nodded, her eyes filled with tears. Every part of her felt heavy with worry. She looked around desperately, wishing her daughter would appear, calling her Mama, like she always did. Khalid stepped ahead again, moving toward a cluster of low wooden structures that villagers sometimes used to store tools. The storm had already begun to shake them. One plank had fallen, lying partly buried in sand. Amina stayed behind him, following his shadow because the storm was now too thick to see clearly otherwise. She called Lena's name again, her voice shaking. Then, out of the chaos of wind and dust, a faint sound reached Khalid's ears. It was small, it was weak, but it was real. He froze for a moment, listening carefully. Amina saw him stop and immediately felt hope fill her chest. "What is it?" she asked. Khalid raised his hand to signal silence. The storm roared. But beneath it, he heard something again, a soft cry, barely louder than a whisper. "It's a child," he said. "She's close." Amina's heart nearly burst. Without wasting another second, Khalid moved toward the sound, stepping faster now. The storm pushed against him, but he leaned forward with determination. Amina followed, each step filled with fear and desperate hope. They were getting closer, and Khalid knew that somewhere in the thick haze of sand, a little girl was waiting alone, scared, and praying for someone to come. The storm was reaching its worst point, but Khalid did not stop, because he knew a child's life depended on what he did next. Khalid moved toward the faint cry with quick, careful steps. The wind pushed against him like a wall, but he refused to slow down. Each gust brought more sand into the air, making it hard to see anything clearly. He covered his face with his scarf, leaving only a small opening for his eyes. Behind him, Amina tried to keep up, her heart pounding with fear and hope at the same time. Every second felt precious. Every sound made her chest tighten. The crying sound came again, but this time it was even softer, almost swallowed by the storm. Khalid listened carefully. He took a few steps to the left, then paused. The sound disappeared. He stepped to the right, and there it was again, clearer now. He pointed toward a slightly lower area, near the wooden storage structures. "She's somewhere down there," he shouted through the wind. Amina followed his finger and felt her heart race faster. The storm was shaking the wooden structures, and some parts had already fallen. She prayed her daughter wasn't trapped under anything dangerous. Khalid hurried forward, leaning into the wind. He crouched low to the ground, using his hands to feel for anything unusual. The sand was cold under his fingers despite the harsh heat of the storm. He brushed away loose sand and crawled a little further. Amina stayed behind him, afraid to look but too terrified to turn away. Then he saw something small against the wooden plank, a tiny hand. His heart jumped. "I found her!" he called out loudly. Amina gasped and rushed forward. Her legs trembled as she ran, her breath catching in her throat. When she reached Khalid, she saw Lena sitting on the ground, half covered in sand, trying to shield herself with her arms. Her cheeks were tear-stained, and her small body shook with fear. Amina fell to her knees beside her daughter. "Lena, my child," she cried softly. Her voice broken but full of relief. Lena looked up, her eyes wide and scared. She reached out for her mother with trembling hands. Amina wrapped her arms around her tightly, tears streaming down her face. She kissed Lena's forehead again and again, whispering words of comfort. For a moment, the world stood still for her. The storm, the fear, the sand, everything disappeared as she held her daughter close. But the storm had not stopped. In fact, it was only getting stronger. Khalid knew they couldn't stay there. The wind was now powerful enough to move small objects and make breathing harder. He stood up and looked at the village, though it was barely visible through the thick sand. He had to make a decision quickly. "We need to leave now," he said firmly. "The storm is getting worse." Amina nodded quickly, holding Lena close. But when she stood up, the wind nearly pushed her back down. She struggled to find her balance. While keeping her daughter safe in her arms, Khalid stepped forward and gently placed a hand on her arm. "Let me carry her," he said, understanding the situation. "You won't be able to walk safely with her in this wind." Amina hesitated for a moment. Lena was the most precious part of her life, and trusting someone else to hold her during such danger was scary. But she looked at Khalid's steady eyes and realized he had already risked his life to find her daughter. He had shown nothing but calmness and courage since the moment he appeared. She nodded, her voice shaking. "Please, take care of her." Khalid gently lifted Lena into his arms. The child clung to him, still scared but sensing safety in his strong grip. He shielded her from the wind with his broad shoulder, making sure no sand hit her face. "Stay close behind me," he told Amina. She followed immediately. Khalid walked through the storm slowly but steadily. His steps were firm, and he leaned against the wind with each movement. Amina stayed just a few steps behind him, keeping her eyes fixed on his back so she wouldn't lose sight of him. The storm was so strong that even shadows looked like they were dancing and disappearing. She knew that without him, she would have never found her way back. The wind roared louder, and the sand swirled around them like a giant spinning curtain. Khalid narrowed his eyes, trying to focus on the direction of the village. He relied on memory and instinct to find the path. Every few seconds, he glanced at Lena to make sure she was okay. Her little hands still clung to his shirt, and her face was pressed against his shoulder. Amina kept whispering prayers as she walked. Her legs burned from the effort, and her throat felt dry from the sand. But she didn't stop. Not even for a moment. She stayed behind Khalid like a shadow, trusting that he knew the safest way. At one point, the wind blew so fiercely that Khalid had to stop and crouch slightly to avoid losing balance. Amina crouched too, covering her head with her hands. The sand hit their backs in waves, like the desert was testing their strength. After a few seconds, the wind eased just enough for them to move again. Khalid stood up, tightened his hold on Lena, and continued forward. Each step was heavy, but his determination was stronger than the storm. They finally saw the faint outlines of the first village houses. The shapes were blurry, like distant memories hidden behind a curtain of sand. But even that faint image filled Amina with hope. "We're close," Khalid shouted. His voice was nearly lost in the storm. But Amina heard him clearly. Her heart filled with relief again. She wiped her eyes and pushed herself to keep going. As they approached the village edge, a few men stood outside their homes, shouting for anyone caught in the storm to come in. When they saw Khalid carrying a child and Amina struggling behind him, they rushed forward. One man took Amina's arm to support her. Another helped guide Khalid toward shelter. They quickly opened the nearest strong wooden door and ushered everyone inside. The moment they stepped in, the noise of the storm became muffled. The air was still dusty, but breathing became easier. Amina stumbled to the floor, her body trembling with exhaustion, relief, and emotion. Khalid gently lowered Lena into her mother's arms. Amina hugged her tightly, unable to stop crying. Lena whispered in a soft, shaky voice, "Mama, I was scared." Amina stroked her daughter's hair and kissed her forehead. "You're safe now," she whispered, her voice full of love. She looked up at Khalid. Her eyes were filled with gratitude so deep that she couldn't find words at first. She opened her mouth to speak, but emotion choked her voice. After a long moment, she finally managed to say, "Thank you. You saved her." Khalid shook his head humbly. Anyone would have helped, but Amina knew that wasn't true. She had lived many years believing that kindness was rare. Yet here was a man who ran into a dangerous storm for a child he didn't even know. He wasn't obligated. He wasn't asked. He simply chose to help. And in that moment, Amina realized something she had never believed before. Compassion still existed in this world. And sometimes, it came from unexpected places, at unexpected moments, through unexpected people. As the storm raged outside, she held her daughter close and looked at Khalid with sincere, heartfelt gratitude. She knew life had changed in that moment, not just for her daughter, but also for herself. Because for the first time in many years, she felt the warmth of true kindness. The storm continued to roar outside for hours, but inside the small shelter, time seemed to slow down. Amina sat on a woven mat with Lena in her lap, holding her tightly as if she never wanted to let go again. Lena was exhausted from fear and crying, and she soon fell asleep with her head resting on her mother's chest. Amina kept her arms wrapped around her daughter, feeling the steady rise and fall of her breath. It was the most comforting sound she had ever heard. Khalid sat a short distance away, brushing sand off his clothes. His face was calm, but his eyes showed signs of exhaustion. Even then, he remained gentle and alert, as if he was still ready to help if anything else happened. Amina glanced at him several times, wanting to speak, but each time the words seemed too small compared to what he had done. Eventually, one of the villagers brought a small tray with warm tea and set it between them. The storm made the walls shake slightly, but the warmth of the room made Amina feel safe again. She whispered a quiet thank you to the villager, but her eyes drifted back to Khalid. He finally looked up and met her gaze. She saw kindness there, not the kind that expected anything in return, but the kind that came naturally from within a good person. Amina took a deep breath. "You saved her," she said softly, trying not to wake Lena. "You saved my whole world." "Saved my whole world." Khalid nodded slightly, though he seemed uncomfortable with praise. "I only did what anyone should do in such a moment." She shook her head. "Not everyone would have gone into a storm that strong. Not everyone would have searched so hard. You were brave." Khalid looked away for a moment, his expression thoughtful. "I have traveled through many deserts," he said slowly. "I have seen storms come and go. Fear becomes less powerful when you know you must act quickly." Amina listened carefully. She realized that although she had lived her whole life near the desert, she had never seen someone so calm and confident in the face of danger. His courage was not loud or showy. It was quiet, steady, and sincere. After a long silence, Amina spoke again. "I don't know how to repay you. You don't need to," he replied gently. But Amina felt differently. For many years, she had survived on her own, believing she had no one to depend on. Now, for the first time, someone had stepped forward without hesitation, without asking anything, without expecting anything. She knew she could never forget this. Lena slowly woke up, rubbing her eyes sleepily. When she saw Khalid sitting nearby, she blinked, and then whispered, "You found me." Khalid smiled warmly. "Yes," he said. "I heard you calling." Lena moved closer to her mother but reached out her small hand to Khalid. He gently took her hand and gave it a reassuring squeeze. Amina watched them, feeling her heart fill with emotions she couldn't fully explain. After some time, the storm finally began to weaken. The roaring echo outside softened, and the sand stopped hitting the walls so loudly. Some villagers stepped outside to check if it was safe. The sky was still cloudy with dust, but the worst had passed. Amina stood up slowly, still holding Lena's hand. She looked at Khalid. "Will you walk with us back to our home?" He nodded without hesitation. They stepped outside together. The village looked different now, covered in a thick layer of sand, with some roofs needing repair and some fences blown down. People were already out, helping each other clean up and gather their things that had blown away during the storm. Amina walked carefully, her steps unsteady after the long night. Khalid walked beside her, ready to support her if she needed help. Lena held both their hands, swinging slightly between them, as if she felt completely safe now. When they reached Amina's house, she saw that one side of the roof had collapsed. Sand had blown inside through the cracks. It would take more than a day to fix everything. Amina sighed softly, feeling the weight of the work ahead. But before she could say anything, Khalid spoke. "I can help repair it." Amina blinked in surprise. "You have already done so much," she said. "It's no trouble," he replied. "I know how to fix roofs. And after what happened, I would like to help you make your home safe again." She felt a warmth spread through her chest. It was not just relief, it was something deeper, something she had not felt in many years. She nodded quietly, grateful beyond words. Khalid began working immediately. He gathered fallen wood, checked the damaged areas, and started rebuilding the weak parts of the structure. Amina helped by handing him tools and clearing sand from the floor. Lena sat nearby, playing with her small collection of colorful stones, watching Khalid with curious eyes. Several villagers came to help as well. They had seen what Khalid did during the storm, and they respected his courage. As they worked together, the atmosphere around them felt light, almost peaceful. By late afternoon, the roof was repaired, and the house looked much safer. Amina stood back and admired the work. She could hardly believe how quickly everything had been fixed. She looked at Khalid, her eyes soft. "Thank you," she said again. "You've helped us more than you know." Khalid brushed the dust off his hands. "I was happy to do it." As the sun lowered, the village returned to normal life. Children played again, Neighbors talked and shared stories of the storm, and the sky began to clear. But inside Amina's heart, something had changed forever. She invited Khalid to stay for tea before he continued his journey. He accepted politely and sat with them near the small fire. The warm light flickered on their faces as they spoke. Lena leaned on her mother's arm and asked Khalid innocent questions: where he was from, why he traveled so much, what other places looked like. He answered each question with patience and a gentle smile. Amina listened, fascinated by his stories of distant towns, tall mountains, and peaceful valleys. For a moment, it felt like they had known each other much longer than a single day. When the time finally came for Khalid to leave, the air grew quiet. Amina stood outside with Lena, watching him prepare for his journey. The wind was calm now, carrying only the soft scent of sand and evening air. Khalid turned to face them. Lena stepped forward and hugged him gently. He smiled and placed a hand on her head. "Be safe," she said in her small voice. "I will," he replied. "And you stay close to your mother." Amina looked at him, her eyes filled with gratitude and something more, something she herself had not fully understood yet. "May your travel be safe," she said softly. Khalid nodded. "Take care of each other. And remember, storms pass, but good moments stay." Then he walked away slowly, his figure fading into the soft colors of the evening desert. Amina watched until she could no longer see him. She held Lena close and felt a deep warmth in her heart, a warmth she had never known before. A feeling born from kindness, bravery, and the unexpected compassion of a stranger. She had lived many years without seeing true care from anyone. She had learned to survive alone, believing kindness was a rare thing. But that day, everything changed. She had seen compassion. She had seen bravery. She had seen that goodness still lived in the world. And it came from a man who walked into a storm just to save a little girl he had never met. Amina looked at her daughter, and Lena smiled up at her. In that moment, Amina knew that this story, this day, would stay with them forever. It would become a memory they would carry through every hardship, every quiet night, and every new beginning. Because on that day, the desert did not only bring a storm, it also brought hope,